So who really,
Gentlemen,
you know,
gentlemen,
I believe.
sorry I have to intrude here.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, Gentlemen
Okay.
and Lady Anna, the hour has come. It's 8 p.m. and we have to return to the issue at hand, which is closer to home, which is in the South China Sea. Those are very interesting geopolitical developments on a global side, but our hour has been designated for discussing more closer, immediate sort of concerns that we have in our neighborhood. The hour has come. It's 8 o'clock, and I want us to, on behalf of the East-West Bridge, welcome and thank you so much for accepting our invitation. My name is Peter Chang. I'm meeting some of you first time. I'm very happy to meet you. I'm a Deputy Director of the Institute of China Studies at the University of Malaya, and also the Research Director of East-West Bridge. East-West Bridge, for those of you who do not know, was founded by Mr. Ko King-Kee. He's a president of the Center for New Inclusive Asia. He set up this East-West Bridge primarily, as the names connote, to be bridge builders between East and West, metaphorically, but it's more than just East and West. It's any other situations that needs bridge builders, platforms in which we could discuss issues that are of concern to us. We like to see ourselves as a platform that is fairly neutral and impartial, in which we can have open and candid discussion on the issues at hand. So we have a very packed program today. We got 6 speakers and it's an hour and a half. So I don't want to spend too much time on the introductory section, but we want to go straight into the discussion as soon as possible. But before I do that, I'd like to pass the time to GGI founder and president, Captain Andy Tian, for a few opening remarks. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. First, let me thank Mr. Ko King-Kee, president of the East-West Bridge, for inviting GGI, the Global Governance Institution, as a co-organizer for this very timely event. And thank Peter for moderation. Given the intense situation in recent days at the front lines, it is very timely that the East-West Bridge hold this event. I quite agree with King-Kee and many other scholars that the more tense the situation and the relation between China and the Philippines is, the more we need to communicate with each other. It is not only for the interest of both peoples, of China and Philippines, but also for the interest of the whole region, because peace and stability are common concerns for all of us. I very much look forward to hearing perspective from experts of both sides to share their thinking on crisis management and confidence building in the South China Sea. Final point, I think any issue if we discuss, we have to involve the China-US competition. The current tension in Jin-Ai, particularly in the past 2 days, I think is largely, in my opinion, due to has relations with the involvement of the United States, explicitly or implicitly. The U.S. has always said that to come to Asia Pacific for peace, but also the Asia Pacific region also witnessed the 3 wars fought by the U.S. after the Second World War, which are all tragedies of our Asian peoples. The U.S. could fight and live, and a out of U.S. war strategy has always been their approach. However, China and Philippines share the unchangeable identity of being maritime neighbors. Peace and stability serve the best interest of both peoples. So how to manage the crisis so that it not be escalating into conflicts? We terribly need advices from experts like you. Let me stop here and turn the floor back to Peter, please.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. Right, let's get the ball rolling. I really would like to have this more like a conversation rather than a panelist presenting a paper. But I do want to allow some time for some opening remarks. Andy has listed out the speaking order for the panelists. Why don't we go down the list like has been presented? But could you just limit your opening remarks, let's say, to about 5 minutes? And then after that, let's have an open conversation. We ask each other's questions. What are your concerns? What are your frustrations on your part by Filipinos friends? How do you feel about the current situation? What do you think China could do better? And my Chinese friends, how do you feel about your Filipino friends, and how should Filipino could have done better in trying to resolve this conflict? So let's try to be as candid as possible. That's where the purpose of this platform is. We hope that we will be able to have a free-flowing discussion. But let's start with 5 minutes each, opening remarks, your overall view, and then whatever suggestions that you may have. And then after that, we'll go into a much more interactive discussion. Okay, with that, Mr. Yang Li, would you like to start off with your 5 minutes remarks, and then Lucio will follow.
Okay, thank you, Peter, and also thank Andy. Thanks, East-West Bridge and the GGI for the kind invitation. And very honored to be the first speaker, but surely not the best. And I also speak in my personal capacity, not on behalf of the organization, because this organization is about China-Europe relations based in Brussels. Because I used to be a diplomat in China, so that I participated in a lot of events in the South China Sea, so that I kind of speak in the capacity of a kind of, how to say, a past veteran of these issues. I agree. In the last few months, multiple incidents between China and the Philippines happened in the South China Sea, and only today we see a new clash between Chinese Coast Guard and a Philippine naval vessel in Scarborough Shoal. And to me, these incidents are not a surprise, but at the same time, it is also surprising. It is no surprise because the disputes, the conflicting claims are always there. So it is unavoidable that some incidents happen from time to time, sooner or later. But I'm also surprised because in the current circumstances, especially against the backdrop of a good overall relationship between China and the Philippines, these incidents should not have happened as they are. The South China Sea disputes between the two countries have very well been managed in the past 6 or 7 years, and the relevant bilateral mechanisms are in place and keep going as scheduled. However, the current situation at sea sometimes gives me a sense of deja vu that we might have gone back into a decade ago, when there is a spiraling escalation of tensions between the two countries. At that time, I was still a diplomat and witnessed events unfold one by one. Reed Bank in 2011, Scarborough Shoal in 2012, and Second Thomas Shoal in 2013. So I think what happened in those years is very well known to all of us, so I will not expand. But there's one point I would like to stress. Today's developments will not be a simple repetition of what happened 10 years. The environment has drastically changed, or rather deteriorated. There are rising geopolitical tensions around the world. And the US-China strategic competitions, as mentioned by Andy, has already intensified. Under such an unfriendly circumstances, or under such an unfriendly environment, any incidents between China and the Philippines are placed at a higher risk level. They are easier to get out of control today than 10 years ago. So in other words, both sides, China and the Philippines, have to take greater political will, use more political wisdom, and put in more resources in the management of these disputes and differences. So it is very timely for us to discuss this topic today. And the next question is, how could China and the Philippines achieve this goal of managing crisis? Of course, South China Sea issues have various aspects involving different actors and require multiple means and channels to manage. So here I would only concentrate on diplomacy. Talking about diplomacy, I think of a term which is frequently used nowadays. That is, keep lines of communication open. It sounds as a pure cliche, but in my view, it is an essential requirement for us to successfully manage any disputes. When diplomatic communication becomes dysfunctional, the risk of escalation will grow bigger. Take an example from the Scarborough Shoal incident in 2012. During its early stage, normal and direct channels of communication between China and the Philippines were almost disrupted, and the so-called microphone diplomacy took its place. As a result, the confrontation persisted, and the situation got worsened. It was until both sides returned to direct diplomacy that the tensions finally cooled down. As the outcome, the problem was not solved, but the situation was brought back under control. It also laid a ground for a special arrangement entered into 4 years later regarding fishing activities in the Scarborough Shoal, when the overall atmosphere was conducive to such an arrangement. But communication is not for the sake of communication. It has to be effective. So for that purpose, past experiences offer some lessons for us to learn. One of the lessons is that both sides should have a strong political will to de-escalate by sharing a clear and a common understanding that communication is not about solving the disputes or problems, but more about managing them. It is easy to understand, but such an understanding is also very easy to be broken in practice. For example, back in around 2011, some people in the Philippines proposed to establish a zone of peace and cooperation in the South China Sea. There was no problem with that term, zone of peace and cooperation, but its concrete formula was inoperable because it was actually grounded upon the resolution of all the disputes on unilateral terms. So pending final settlements acceptable to both sides, it is natural, maybe natural, both sides may need to preserve their respective claims and positions, but it is not a time to impose any unilateral solution on the other side. Therefore, for a political will to be fostered and demonstrated, an essential element would be that both sides faithfully and unswervingly sticking to the target of managing the disputes, rather than prematurely imposing solutions or final solutions. This is the first lesson. Another lesson is that both sides should try to appreciate the goodwill from the other side as far as possible, so as to give larger rooms for diplomacy. Only by doing so could they work together or work towards each other to achieve the common goal of de-escalating tensions. And I will not expand on that for the sake of time. And the third lesson is that as far as the bilateral disputes are concerned, both sides shall put more emphasis on direct talks and not rely on intervention from the third parties. I think that point was also stressed by Andy. Obviously, the United States is the biggest external factor. It is widely believed in China that the United States is behind almost all of the provocations in the South China Sea. And this is part of a strategy to contain China or to shape the environment of China's neighborhood. True or not, it might only be part of the story. I feel that the United States has another strong concern, that is not to be dragged into conflicts only for the sake of all these small land features in the South China Sea. Yes, they did make some statements on the Mutual Defense Treaty commitment, but its aim, to me, in my view, might be to deter rather than actually act. As regards its actual response in case of conflict between China and the Philippines happen, it is at least highly uncertain. In fact, the United States has its own agenda, and the China-US relationship, although obviously deteriorated, still have larger and broader stakes to take care of. So the South China Sea issues or maritime issues are only part of the relationship, not the entirety, just like the case between China and the Philippines. So is the United States willing or able to risk an all-out conflict with China? It's very hard to tell. So with these thoughts, I will end up here, and I'm expecting to discuss with you later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yang Li. Thank you. Lucio, I just want to take on two of the key points that Yang Li just said. You know, Yang Li says that he was caught by surprise. How quickly situation de-escalated, escalated. You know, just a change of administration can brought about such a sudden change of the situation and was caught by surprise. I wonder whether you also were caught by surprise. The other point that Yang Li says that it clearly is because of the United States that situations has gone. Do you read it that it's the same way that it is entirely due to the United States angle that make the situation where it is today? Lucio, the floor is yours.
Yeah, quickly on those 2 points. Yeah, I agree that the leadership change have a bearing on the issue of the South China Sea as far as the Philippines is concerned. You know, unlike China, where there's pretty much a lot of continuity and stability, the Philippines every 6 years, it's public knowledge that we change leaders, and along with that, of course, foreign policy, security priorities also change, and also the policy in dealing with major powers like US and China also changes. So I think this dynamic is not unique in the Philippines. I mean, the last elections in Maldives, you know, I think going forward, all elections in the Pacific countries or countries that have crucial, could tip the balance between the US and China, the elections there are always worth watching. And of course, there will be a lot of analysis as to what kind of policies the new government would pursue. Now, secondly, on the impact of US on the South China Sea, of course, undeniably, US is a key player. And of course, because of its presence in the region, and you know, it's concerned about China eroding its presence or its leadership role or the security guarantee that it provides to allies and partners that have kept the peace in the region. So, of course, this is the U.S. Narrative. And of course, between U.S. and China, there are a lot of issues compared to that between China and the Philippines, or between ASEAN countries and China. So I think between U.S. and China, there's a lot to be discussed. And of course, regrettably, flashpoints like the South China Sea tend to become an extension, or an arena of major power contest, and other countries' concerns. In some instances, they tend to be marginalized. So let me go through my points. Let me offer some broad strokes. So I think on the recent untoward sea incidents and the tensions between the Philippines and China in relation to the maritime issue, I think it's important to have less talk, because less talk is less mistake, and stick to the message. So again, it has become a cliche, for leaders of both sides to say that the maritime issues is not the sum total of the relations. But I think it's very important to reiterate this. Every time there will be tensions or disputes or untoward developments in the maritime space, it's very important for leaders of both sides at the highest levels, the foreign ministry of both sides, to have a lead on the situation, and to try to pacify nationalist ferment from both sides, and to reiterate that this is just one aspect of the relations, one irritant in the relations that needs to be managed by both sides as well. And that's so it's a cliche, but it's very important cliche, that the maritime issues is not the sum total, it's not the be all, it need not define bilateral relations, and that dialogue is the better way to address the issue. So I think going back to that message, every time there is a incident, it's a good starting point. And then third, related to that, avoid fanning nationalist sentiment to preserve legal room for diplomacy. I think this is very important because at some points, rhetoric statements, whether from the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of both sides, or from especially from law enforcement agencies that are not properly equipped with the proper diplomatic training or etiquette on how to handle situations like this. So sometimes they step overboard, or inadvertently they make statements that arouse greater public opinion and sentiment that make it difficult for the top leadership to have that space for discussion. And then another point would be to advertise the benefit of broader positive relations and highlighting the potentials for further gains. So while we have these issues, while we have disputes over this maritime space, it's very important to argue to the public that when we communicate, whether in press conferences or in press releases made by Ministry of Foreign Affairs of both sides or the relevant authorities of both sides, to argue that this is just one aspect of the relations and that the broader relations are positive, whether economics, trade, people-to-people ties. So it's very important to stress that. So, but at the same time, we have to recognize that there is this increasing dialogue fatigue, and this is a problem, especially, I'm not sure about the Chinese side, but from the Philippine side, we see some evidence of this. So there's it's also important for both sides that while we talk, and there is no shortage of mechanisms that we had put in place. And for instance, the bilateral consultative mechanism that was set up in 2016 already made 7 times. The last one was on March this year during the present Marcos administration. It was held in Manila. So there are discussions, but we have to show to our publics that these discussions deliver. Otherwise, the dialogue fatigue will set in. So I think that's one. So we need to show the gains from this in order to sustain public interest. Otherwise, the previous Duterte administration had been criticized, by some pundits or analysts, or also some people from the present government, that they did not do much to protect Philippine maritime interests in the West Philippine Sea. Hence, other approaches have to be tried. So the dialogue has to be there. It's very important, but the dialogue has to deliver. Otherwise, there will be frustration. And then finally, maybe so far, what is apparent on the Philippine approach is that this bear all, this tell all, this transparency strategy is becoming the in thing, becoming the approach from the Philippine side. But I hope that it's a means and not an end to itself. And I hope that eventually diplomacy, will still be the way to go. And I think on the point about law enforcement people taking much of the limelight, of course, their training is different from that of foreign affairs people. Not to put a bad light, or not to cast aspersion on their capabilities, but it takes because there are sensitivities attached to disputes, whether sovereignty, sovereign rights, jurisdictional disputes. So it's I think very important for law enforcement people to stick to law enforcement issues if they have and not wade into larger issues and defer issues of that nature to the foreign affairs. So far, from the Philippine side, that seems to be not the case at the present. We're hoping that it could change, but yeah, so maybe I will stop there.
Thank you, Lucio. Thank you. I just want to bring up one point that you mentioned. It's about this need to put a lid on this kind of fanning up of nationalistic sentiments over the island disputes and step back and to have a bigger picture, because the South China Sea dispute doesn't define the relationship, the whole of the relationship between Philippines and China. Yet we don't, sometimes we seem to lose the trees for the forest. We just can't see the big picture. And I assume you are saying that both sides have to bear some responsibility for that. I'm not too sure
Thank you.
whether General Chopao, do you have any kind of sort of feedback, sort of insights or remarks or a reaction to this, that we don't seem to be able to see the big picture and got caught in this tiny dangerous South China Sea dispute? Professor General Chopao, the time is yours now.
Thank you. Well, in Chinese system, I'm only a senior colonel, not a general. I always want to become a general, but I can't. Yeah, so that's why I have to become a scholar. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I won't talk for too long, but I will be honest to share with you how I feel. My feeling, just like Yang Li's description of his surprise, my feeling actually is kind of confusion. Because if I just compare President Duterte and President Marcos, I feel totally confused. Why? Because I would say, in spite of his, tough talk, or tough image of President Duterte, he actually outsmarted many people in that, you see, because the Maritime Tribunal has actually made a ruling that is in favor of Philippines. So therefore, theoretically, if President Duterte take a top position in line with that kind of ruling, that is understandable, although it is not acceptable to Chinese, right? But instead, he actually has taken a rather moderate approach to China, and this kind of good sentiments was reciprocated by China. Yeah, so basically the relationship was not very much affected. But I generally believe that President Duterte also would accept the tribunal's ruling, because that is in the favor of the Philippines. So that is why I say he's an extremely smart guy. Then the President Marcos really confused me, because I don't understand why all of a sudden he would make such a U-turn in Filipino policy toward China. In the beginning, we have a lot of good sentiments toward him, because I actually have watched the film when his mother, took him to meet Mao Zedong, and his mother was crying, but so excited, and he at that young age was not much, affected, but he was there, so he should understand better than some other people about the historical roots of this relationship. Then, seeing what the Philippines has opened 9 bases for Americans, and those activities near Scarborough Shoal and Second Thomas Shoal, I have to ask why. You see, actually it went beyond the South China Sea issue. Opening 9 bases to America would seem to us that the Philippines would like to be involved in a potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait. I'm not saying that this conflict is inevitable or imminent, but why don't you just use your brain to think about this? To give 9 bases, to Americans, although you have set some conditions, but Chinese, how would the Chinese read that? It's such a big U-turn. How would China think that? And if China thinks very negatively about this, then China's position might be hardened when it comes to bilateral issue. You see, so this is the totally confusing. You know, we won't attack Filipinos. Historically, the Filipino actually killed the Chinese fishermen from Highland and from Taiwan, right? So you see, I always think about this. Historically, you are never stronger. You are never ever stronger than us. And why would you kill Chinese like this? So in spite of this, we have never vowed to attack you or to take any islands, rocks by force. We would never even threaten with use of force. Then why all of a sudden you would become so pro-American? You are just making yourself prawns, in this game. Everybody just want to avoid, to be involved in great power competition. And you would just volunteer, by opening 9 bases. So that's why I'm confused. I need some answers from you. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Colonel Jobo. This is a very, very direct question. And Aaron, you are lined up next to take on that question. Do you want to give an answer to Colonel Jobo? Why is it that the Philippines have made such a U-turn?
Okay, Colonel Joe, I also would like to promote you based on the Philippine ranking system, General Joe. But so it's nice to see familiar faces. Colonel Joe, I believe we have General Joe, I believe we have met before. Lucio,
yes.
Miss Anna, and Dr. Wu. So it's nice to see new faces. Dr. Peter, Dr. Yang, and Mr. Andy. So a very good evening from Manila, and thanks again for the invitation to take part in this roundtable discussion. On the answer of on the question of General Joe about the Philippines being involved in a possible Taiwan issue, actually, not too long ago, Taiwan's defense minister mentioned that there needs to be closer security cooperation, or there needs to be a security cooperation with the Philippines. And our defense minister, Secretary Teodoro, actually said that the Philippines cannot engage in a security cooperation with Taiwan. And I believe this is in line with what President Marcos has said, that we will continue to toe the one China policy. I think this is a matter also of perspective. Although the EDCA sites might be used in a Taiwan contingency, but they could also be used for other contingencies, west of the Philippines or east for the Philippines. So it also is a matter of perspective. Actually, it can be used for any contingency, including Taiwan. But the Philippine interest is really not to be involved in a Taiwan conflict, because we already find our plate full with the tensions in the South China Sea. But of course, we have an ally, and that is the United States, who has broader security interests. Philippine interests mainly revolve around South China Sea, but that of the US revolve around the South China Sea plus Taiwan, and even plus the East China Sea, because they're a great power. To deliver my talking points, I believe this discussion comes at a very crucial time, because as has been said by the previous speakers, we are again experiencing increasing tensions in the South China Sea. And I actually agree with the title of this webinar, that there needs to be crisis management and confidence building endeavors by both Beijing and Manila. And doing this, I think, requires an acknowledgement and identification of actions that both sides deem as confidence eroding. Okay? Before we build confidence, we have to identify what are the actions that erode confidence. And this is no less than the incidents that have taken place in the Second Thomas Shoal and in Scarborough Shoal. Adding to this is the fact that more external powers, besides the United States, are now making their presence felt in the South China Sea, namely India, Japan, Canada, France, Australia, and the United Kingdom, among others. And so with this, our role as track 2 diplomats could not come at a better time to talk about things not yet being talked about by those in the official channels and be more creative in coming up with solutions or management ideas. Doing this demands a need for hard but cordial conversations to take place and hear things that we need to hear. Okay, for the Philippines, the things that Manila find unusual are the following in recent months. The water cannoning incident and the laser pointing incident and the prevention of free supply access to Philippine-held maritime features. Actually, some mechanisms are already present between China and the Philippines. Not too long ago, both countries formed a hotline at the ministerial level between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the DFA. And President Duterte, in his private capacity, also visited China and even met with President Xi himself. But it is quite unfortunate that after these initiatives, we have seen again tensions. So maybe more communication engagements need to take place. Moreover, there needs to be, I think, negotiations about what the Philippines can and cannot do in the Second Thomas Shoal and in Scarborough Shoal. For example, can Philippine fishermen again fish around Scarborough Shoal and as well as inside Scarborough Shoal? Second, can the Philippines be allowed to repair its ship on Second Thomas Shoal? Because unlike Vietnam, who has reclaimed maritime features in the South China Sea, the Philippines is actually only maintaining the status quo by only repairing the ship that's already on the Second Thomas Shoal. And we are not reclaiming any land over there. Lastly, what if the Philippines cancels joint patrols with the US or other countries? Will China grant the Philippines complete fishing and resupply access to the maritime features? For China, I believe the major concern is this. President Marcos is seen as pro-American, given the expansion of the EDCA sites, especially that some of the new EDCA sites are near Taiwan. But besides this, we also would like to ask our Chinese friends, what other things or actions concern China? Is it the military exercises with the US? Or is China punishing the Philippines for pursuing closer relations with the United States? I believe these things are important to address because right now in the Philippines, there is a chicken and egg situation. For China, I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, everything the Philippines does is at the behest of the United States. For the Philippines, what it is doing is in response to China's activities, which have also taken place during the time of President Duterte, and is a normal balancing behavior for a small state because it is not just the US that the Philippines is seeking to strengthen closer security relations with, but it's also doing the same with Japan, India, Australia, France, and the UK and Canada, and the like. Significantly, in just 2 minutes, I'm done. There is a clear potential for things to escalate because, admittedly, unlike Vietnam and Malaysia, the Philippines is a US ally. And wars happen because states intend them happen, not because wars happen not because states intend them to happen, but wars happen because also of miscalculations. And that is, of course, what we want to avoid here, miscalculations. All in all, I believe that tensions in the South China Sea need to be managed under the framework of the Global Security Initiative. China has made this work for Saudi Arabia and Iran, and perhaps for Israel and Palestine as well soon. And it should work for Manila and Beijing as claimants to the features in the South China Sea. Secondly, functional cooperation should still continue because this will show that the South China Sea is not the sum total of Sino-Philippine relations. Third, both Manila and Beijing need to continue to display commitment to the finalization of the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea to realize durable peace and stability. Fourthly, Manila needs to continue to engage with China because even its major ally, the United States, continues to send high-level officials and delegations to engage with China. So why shouldn't we do the same? And it is also important for Manila to highlight and publicize the pragmatic side in constructive relations with China, so as to show that there's not only tensions, but there continues to be convergence between Manila and Beijing. So I will stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Aaron just come back with this response from our Chinese friends that says that Philippines is really acting at the behest of the United States. And Aaron says, no, Philippines has its own legitimate national concerns. They are concerns about incidents that has happened in some of the islands. They do want to have the rights to resupply and fishery rights. And these are purely Philippines' national sovereignty question. It has nothing to do with the United States at all. And Aaron, I think, fear that the Chinese may be misreading the whole situation here, putting the conflict within that broader framework when Philippines itself has very real legitimate concerns. With that, I want to pass the next time to Dr. Wu. Dr. Wu, would you like to respond to Aaron and others and with your own comments? Dr. Wu, the floor is yours.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Peter. I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to participate in this workshop and see older friends online, particularly Captain Tian and I just met in Beijing last week. I really enjoyed the presentations delivered by previous speakers. According to the theme of this workshop, is about the crisis management and confidence building in the South China Sea. I'm going to look at the current South China Sea situation just for your references and to accelerate our discussions. Due to the geopolitical competition between United States and China and the maritime jurisdiction dispute between China and the claimant states, the South China Sea now has emerged as a theater of political, economic, and security concerns, not only for the countries in this region, but also for the world at large. In my opinion, contrary to conventional wisdom, the South China Sea issue is not about contestation over territory or control over resources alone. With facilities including artificial islands, airstrips, or structures being built in the area, concerns about the freedom of navigation, the right to innocent passage have become an overwhelming security issue, and made the South China Sea region a flashpoint, according to many assessments, can lead to confrontation involving conventional military means, such as the use of military bases in the South China Sea region, joint military exercises between the United States and its allies and partners, and FNOPs by United States, targeted at China. So in this sense, the South China Sea situation now, in my opinion, my basic judgment, the South China Sea will enter a new period of turbulence and uncertainty. From now on, maybe in the coming years, China will, face more international challenges. The window is narrowing for low-cost unilateral actions before the conclusion of the COC. The U.S. the destabilizing factors in the South China Sea figure more prominently. Some ASEAN countries, just my personal perspective, some ASEAN countries are selective or opportunistic in choosing sides between China and the United States, despite both China and United States, didn't want the ASEAN to choose sides between them. And ASEAN, holds its diplomacy as neutrality. All this will put China in an awkward situation when its double efforts for peace and stability in the South China Sea only gets half outcomes. I have, some basic points with regard to the current South China Sea situation. Number one is the U.S. aims to contain China in its South China Sea policy. U.S. South China Sea policy is no longer neutrality. In my opinion, United States shifted its South China Sea policy from neutrality to relatively limited interference and then active interference in South China Sea and now choosing sides. What does it mean? It means United States, will support, whoever would like to confront it with China in the South China Sea region. So that is what I said. United States is choosing side between China and other claimant states. So this policy is now shifting from politics and diplomacy to military and security. Signature events include 4 new U.S. military bases in the Philippines and Atacama, in addition to another 5. The signing of the Philippine bilateral defense guidelines, the U.S. factor behind the wrong edge of Second Thomas Shore incident, and the recent finger point in the spirit of Camp David, joint statement of Japan, the Republic of Korea, and the United States against China efforts to uphold its rights in the South China Sea. The wording mentioned by the joint statement of Camp David, like this: the dangerous and aggressive behavior changes the status quo. The arbitration award sets out the legal basis. And also the recent U.S., Japan, Philippine trilateral Coast Guard maritime exercises in the South China Sea that took place in August. Second, my point 2 is some claimant countries have a stronger sense of urgency in taking unilateral infringement actions in the South China Sea region, sometimes in new ways. They are moving notably fast in expanding and consolidating their claims with the goal of creating a fait accompli. Let me give some examples for you. Vietnam. Vietnam is expanding islands and reefs and deploying facilities there night and day at an alarming speed. So far, Vietnam has, reclaimed the islands or reefs now reached the total size is about 3 square meters. To be frankly, the Philippines is promoting legislation, taking actions on the sea, such as strengthening the control of islands and reefs, delaying oil and gas cooperation that has already reached the consensus between the heads of the state in order to consolidate the arbitral award. For Malaysia, although Malaysia has not engaged in open confrontation or conflict with China, it doesn't hesitate in developing oil and gas in the contested waters, and it keeps pushing for the Commission on the limits of the continental shelf to review its claim for the outer continental shelf. It is submitted to SCS in December of 2019. And Indonesia and Vietnam's delimitation of the South China Sea EEZ will add new uncertainties to the South China Sea in the future. My third point about the current South China Sea situation is the COC. Aaron just mentioned the COC consultation. He just mentioned China and the Philippines should work together to finalize the COC. The COC consultations, negotiations will enter uncharted waters, although China and ASEAN countries completed the second reading, agree on the guidelines to accelerate negotiations, and put forward a new 3-year target mentioned in the new guidelines. The parties basically have not touched, any substantive and sensitive issues, such as the relationship between the DOC and the COC. The legal binding forces, whether the upcoming COC should have legal binding forces or not. The third party interests, the geopolitical scope, and also those key points or sensitive issues, in my opinion. Each of these issues could bring the consultation to a standstill or even to an impasse. In conclusion, the future of the South China Sea situation will enter a troubled water. U.S. lead South China Sea militarization will be intensified, and the climate states will have more and more unilateral actions. And the COC, with regard to the COC negotiation, in my personal opinion, is not so confident or so optimistic about the COC negotiation. So I would stop there. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wu, for the sober and in some ways difficult assessments of the future. The window is closing, as you said. Things are getting a lot more harder for breakthrough. The COC negotiation doesn't look very promising. So it appears to be a fairly bleak assessment of the situation right now. Anna, your turn, and give us your take on how you read the situation as from your perspective, from your side. Anna, you got to unmute. Yeah, we still can't hear you.
Yeah, that one is okay.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, this is good now. This is good now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much to GGI and also East-West Bridge for inviting me as one of the discussant in this forum, which is more on crisis management. But I think before we can do crisis management, is probably we should assess the situation really and what's really at stake, because you cannot bridge anything if you don't have a realistic assessment of the situation in the South China Sea, not just between the Philippines and China, but even in relation to other claimant states and third parties like the United States and the alliance. I actually don't call them anymore United States per se alone. It's a Western alliance led by the United States. That's how in a more geopolitical mind, that's how I call them these days. And I think many people would know in my writings and published in Manila Times and even in different forums how I feel about the situation and how I disagree with the current administration in how they handle the current crisis or tension in the South China Sea. First and foremost, I just would like to emphasize now, as a Filipino, not necessarily representing any organization, but just as an ordinary, regular Filipino, I don't think the national interest of the Philippines is to be dragged in any military conflict, even in the region. May it be over the Taiwan Strait or may it be in the South China Sea. Because if you really look at the look at this areas in the Asia Pacific region, these are flashpoints. And we don't have to be very polite about this, because we know that the United States is fueling these tensions and using, I'll be very straightforward, using my country as a buffer or even as a pawn in this geopolitical competition and rivalry between China and the Philippines. I think I'm very frank when it comes to my views about these issues and looking at it in the geopolitical perspective. Second one, I think, is the current administration, I'll be very frank, is not wise and pragmatic in its approach in responding to the tensions and crisis in the South China Sea at the moment. I would still go back to how Duterte managed the whole thing. I mean, if you really listen and would go back to how the Duterte administration handled it, I would agree that it did not mean that actually Duterte said that he is not upholding the arbitral ruling. But what he was saying actually is like, okay, let's focus more on areas that both China and the Philippines has already agreed and cooperate, and let's put it not really aside the arbitral ruling, but keep it low key, because that is not the totality of the relationship between the two countries, China and the Philippines. That's actually the approach. In that sense, you have really a good balancing, foreign policy between a superpower like the United States, where we'll keep at bay. And to certain extent, the Philippines was able to stand and promote really an independent foreign policy during the previous administration, but at the same time pursuing a more pragmatic approach in terms of its relation with China and focusing on economics, because I believe that countries in the global south and developing countries like my country should be focusing more in economic development and prosperity, and having a conflict with China will not be to our advantage, even in the economic front, because that is the reality. And we have, as Filipinos, we have to face it. And I think in terms of approaching the South China Sea, we need to be more pragmatic. For me, I would rather have a more cooperation with China on the economic front, talk the South China Sea and resolve it peacefully and diplomatically speaking, and keep this tension in a low key, and pursue whatever kind of mechanism you can pursue just to talk it out. Because I believe if you talk more, you discuss things more, in a way, you kind of, have that confidence building measure, even if it's difficult to talk, as long as you talk. And I think you will go somewhere with that. So that's one thing. But one thing that we have to remember also, and we have to factor in the whole discussion of the South China Sea, is the domestic politics of the Philippines. And I think people in China probably should try to study more how the domestic politics in the country runs. Because if you really look at it, when you talk about the South China Sea issue, there are a lot of misunderstanding, and there's a lot of misinformation and deception, especially about the arbitral ruling. The media has been, repeating that the arbitral ruling is some kind of a UN decision, or it's like there is a UN sanction to it, like an ICJ kind of decision, but it's not. In the arbitral ruling, if we really would want to point out one thing, it only ruled one thing, that the 9-dash line of China is not recognized. That's the ruling. And the other one is that, but it did not rule on issues of sovereignty or territorial integrity. So that issue, which is convoluting the whole South China Sea, is misguided in many ways in the country because of media hype and disinformation. And one thing also that I think for both sides, especially for my country, is to recognize that you cannot push for something or the other side is not, it's not amenable to it. I think both countries has to meet halfway and meet in the middle ground. And from the middle ground, you talk it out. And what will happen? Because what is happening right now is tension is escalating. Just this afternoon, I've read a news report that China kind of shy away the boats of the Philippines, or the ships of the Philippines, who are trying to enter Scarborough Shoal, and of course the CCG spokesperson explained this. On the other hand, the Philippines is claiming that it's not true, or they said they disclaim that. So it means that you can see that there's like there's a war of words between the two countries. I think this is not going anywhere, but I'm also happy that it's just words. We're at war with words, not necessarily with military arms, because that's another issue. And I think that's something that we should not go. That is a track that I think everyone will not agree, because there's no winner in war or military conflict. It's always about losing. Both sides would lose in that sense. And another thing I think is the domestic factors. Aside from misinformation and disinformation about the South China issue, especially in the context of the Philippines, you have to take a look at also the domestic politics in terms of, look, when this issue of the South China Sea becomes very magnified, it's on two things. During budget hearings, second is when election is upcoming. Because that is, well, it's been the domestic politics of the Philippines. They use the South China Sea issue. Politicians would use it and would make a pronouncement against China. It's precisely because they want to be popular, and that is the reality in my country. And I think China just has to look at this and take a look at it. Probably if they will, take seriously these politicians or not, based on the context and based on the domestic politics that's going on in the Philippines. I think these are things that are very important. If China also would want to understand why things are happening, why the Philippines is employing megaphone diplomacy, and why many politicians are speaking against China in that strong way, you need to factor in domestic politics, and one of that always is about election. Sad to say, that's how it is. And that's the reality, really. Second, I don't believe, I'll be very frank also. Pitlo is here and Aaron is here, and they know me, I think, quite a bit. That I believe that our foreign policy is not balanced at all. It's really leaning towards the United States, and not just with the United States, but the Western alliance led by the United States, which basically includes what? UK, and now Japan is in the picture, and even Taiwan is trying to have some kind of military and defense. It's good that our defense secretary said no, it's not possible, because we are honoring the one China policy. And I hope it's not just words, but in action too, because sometimes it's one thing to say something, but it's another thing to do an act, which comes to the point of confusion that was raised earlier, confused about President Marcos really way of handling situation. Because if you really look at it, he went to China and it was a very good visit, state visit here, or working visit. But after 3 weeks, he kind of opened the country to have 3 to 4 weeks, I think, after there was already an opening for additional 5 EDCA bases. And yes, it was a surprise, not only for the Chinese, but even for Filipinos like me, because we were not expecting that, but it happened. And EDCA, I think, complicates the whole dynamics in the South China Sea. And we know for a fact that, of course, China is not happy about it. So these are realities that both countries are facing, and especially my country. And at the end of the day, you have to remember, I think the Chinese has to remember as well that, as what Pitlo earlier have said, every 6 years, we have a change of government and a change of administration. So in that case, there's also this possibility always that there will be a change in foreign policy. So you see, Duterte, Aquino more towards the United States. You have the Scarborough Shoal standoff. You have the tribal filing of cases. Then you have Duterte, which is really balanced in as far as I'm concerned, and had a good relation with China. And now you have a Marcos, which beyond expectation was more leaning to the United States. In fact, we were expecting him to be more balanced and just continue the Duterte foreign policy. So every 6 years, a change in admin, there's the possibility of changing the foreign policy is there. So I think the Chinese has to be aware of that. Now, it's not really forever that, probably things will change in a matter of time. So I think the Chinese also has to be patient about the situation, because that's just how our system works, politically speaking. So probably after 6 years, another president would come, foreign policy will change again. It's on our side, actually, how to make our foreign policy more stable, and it's not subject to change every now and then that there's a change in president. So I think that's one thing that we have to factor in if you really want to analyze why there is an escalating tension in the Philippines, in between the two countries, and the South China Sea is some kind of it's in the middle of all this. But when you talk about crisis management, I think, as far as I'm concerned, engagement in diplomacy and dialogue is the way to go. Confrontation is not good, and it will never be good for both countries, even for China, I think. And then second, I think, is building mutual trust and confidence, both at the state-to-state level and at the same time people-to-people. So the people-to-people ties is very important when the state-to-state level are not working at all, or it's very challenging to have to bridge that gap. I think people-to-people, like what we're doing right now, is very, very important. To a certain extent, it shows that we are concerned about the issue and we don't want it to escalate and to go somewhere that we don't want, all of us doesn't want. The second one, I think, is very important, and I hope this really would work, the joint resource development in the South China Sea. I mean, the oil and gas possible joint venture is important for the Philippines. I just hope that the current administration would see the wisdom that this is important and we can do this together, even though there are legal issues on the part of the Philippines, because it seems like there are some kind of violation of our constitution. But, if there's a will, there's a way. That's why political will on both sides are very important. On the other hand, I think track to diplomacy is important. I think this is the time that, think tanks, experts, analysts and people like us should talk more, try to offer some kind of advice to our governments and tell them what we think and what do we think is the best course forward for the South China Sea issue, to de-escalate the tension, and how the two countries should proceed when you talk about the relationship, not just economically speaking, but even politically, which is very, very important at this time. And then regional cooperation. This one I would make an emphasis, because I think this would persuade more, particularly the Philippines, to some kind of reflect of in terms of its foreign policy. I think there's a need for more regional cooperation in the South China Sea. Engaging with other ASEAN member states and regional partners can help create a conducive environment for conflict resolution. It is also vital for ASEAN to continue to assert ASEAN centrality in regional dynamics. It must continue to pursue an active role, non-aligned role, in the whole dynamics of the South China Sea. Because if ASEAN will be perceived as that, then it will have more credibility as an actor that will probably be a bridge between, let us say, Philippines and China in terms of crisis management and in terms of de-escalating conflict or de-escalating tension. And I think I understand what Dr. Shicun said, that the fate or the fate of the code of conduct in the South China Sea is not as bright because of course, the dynamics that's going on. But I still believe that every one of us should try to push, especially countries, the governments of different countries, especially claimant states, should push for the code of conduct in the South China Sea, because the code of conduct is the only way for all relevant states or claimant states in the South China Sea to act accordingly. And it to a certain extent, it will create some kind of it would transform the behavior of claimant states, and they will be more aware of how they're gonna conduct themselves vis-a-vis with each other. So I think, the code of conduct will create strategic opportunities coupled with joint efforts and cooperation, especially in terms of difficult, challenging moments or crisis. And this should be something that, though hard and bleak in some ways, I think we should not give up and we should push for it as much as we can. So yeah, that's I think that's my view. And I think also when it comes to crisis and management of dispute in not only in the South China Sea but in the Asia Pacific region, to be very frank with you, to all of you, I don't believe at this time, I don't believe in neutrality. I believe that countries and people should stand on the side of peace. It's not anymore about you're neutral or not. It's really a choice of countries and people where you are. Would you be on the side of peace or you neutral without any stand at all? I don't believe in it. Because if a country or people would stand on the side of peace, then you know what to do. And that would lead you to somewhere that steps that would de-escalate tension and resolve dispute because you're on the side of peace. So I think that's my position as a person and even as an analyst, I think, and as an academic. I would stand on the side of peace because that would tell me what are the necessary steps. The tensions in the South China Sea, tension in the Taiwan Strait should be resolved and how it should be resolved. And I hope countries would stand on the side of peace. Thank you so much and good evening to all.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.